بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Firstly, to the organizers, Jazakumullahu khairan for this opportunity. It gives me an excuse to come to Delhi. Really, you've got a very beautiful city here. Of course, it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I don't like military terminology, but it's like comrades in arms, where I kind of feel we're all in the same job of learning more and sharing with others for a better society. Definitely, our approach has been to improve society through the Ummah, as is our mandate, and to be useful, to ensure that Allah's guidance permeates every sector of society for the betterment of humanity in this life and the hereafter. And may Allah continue to guide us in that area. It's not a job you finish doing. Medicine never reaches a stage where it says, we've solved malaria, no need to worry about illnesses again. Even malaria would mutate and you would need new medicines. So, every material, every book is always in need of improvement. So I'm saying this at the beginning so that if you find anything in the material, please, I'm a student of this subject area, and I hope that your contributions will ensure that the next edition of this material is better than it is. So if we please just have that at the back, or actually at the fore of our minds as we go through this. I'd like to also thank the organizers, the IMA also, very, very hospitable brothers and sisters. It's really been a wonderful time. My wife and I have really loved it in Johannesburg, love it here, and inshallah after this is Cape Town, and we pray Allah blesses the whole trip, inshallah, for all of us. The subject, as you probably have already been told, and some of you have already flipped through the table of contents, is around three major subjects. In the Islamic sciences, those subjects that we are usually more accustomed to are the subjects of Ulum al-Quran and Ulum al-Hadith, the sciences of tafsir and the interpretation of the Quran, those that deal with the authenticity and the interpretation of hadith and their contexts. So we usually know of muhaddithun, we usually know of mufassirun. Many of us have heard of qurra, those who are into recitation, tajweed. Thank you, brother, for the beautiful recitation. And we also know of those who are involved in seerah and telling us about prophets of the past, or the Prophet ﷺ and his lifetime. We also know fuqaha, scholars of fiqh. And of course, a lot of things we have already heard. This is haram, this is halal, this is makruh, this is mustahab, etc., etc. This subject hopes to focus below the ground. So if fiqh is a tree, the subject of usulul fiqh is studying the roots. If fiqh is law, then usulul fiqh studies how the law was arrived at. What evidence do you use to say something is haram? If fiqh is the answer to the equation, usulul fiqh studies the equations and how they are arrived at, or how they are derived. Before moving forward, this is just to define basically the subject area we're looking at. And as we move on, we will be introducing two other subject areas that are related to this usulul fiqh, which is the qawaid of fiqh, the legal maxims, and the maqasid of Sharia, which is the higher intents or objectives, purposes, goals of the Islamic way of life or Islamic law or just Sharia. In mathematics, they have a system, and in most sciences, they have a system of what they call triangulation. Ways of verifying whether something was right. So there's another way of determining whether something is right. So for example, 3 times 7 is what? 21. Is there another way we could find out whether 3 times 7 is 21? How could we do that? Good. Add 7 3 times, so it's plus you're doing, and see whether it comes up with 21. Any other way?
You put 7 objects in 3 places and count them.
Very good. So get 7 objects in 3 places and count them. Good. Any other method?
21 divided by 7.
Good. You can just divide 21 by 7 and see whether it gives you 3. Or divide 21 by 3 and see whether it gives you 7. Or multiply this by this. Or subtract 3 from 21 7 times to see whether it comes to 0. In other words, there's more than one way of finding or verifying whether 3 times 7 is 21. And what we will see is how the tools of usul, qawaid and maqasid help in doing something similar to a fatwa. In other words, when a scholar reaches a conclusion, there's usually more than one way of testing how strong that opinion is. So you can look at it from a qawaid perspective, you can look at it from a maqasid perspective. And if there's a problem from any perspective, then there's the need to come and look at it again very carefully. There probably must be a mistake somewhere. Before we move on, I'd just like to find from some of you, what are those things that you feel or you hope you will get out of this course at the end of today? As Brother Amra mentioned, we usually do this course as a train the trainers course in 8 days. And it's about 7 hours a day. We sometimes do it in 5 days. Today we're doing it in 1 day. So really today is an overview. So I know many of you will be disappointed that we couldn't go in depth on any particular issue or we didn't touch something. So I'm apologizing ahead of time that we will face that challenge of if only we had more time on this or that. However, just to reduce the disappointment, are there any particular objectives that you feel at the end of the day, I would like to understand this, or I hope? Simple question, what brings you here? Yeah, anybody? Yes, please.
I think I'm just interested in the variance that we have. Sometimes the different perspectives, and it's extreme spectrum, where one school will say something and another school will say something else.
Good. Good, so that inshallah we won't worry about, we will cover that. Any others? Yes.
I think the issue about fiqh and Sharia,
Good.
where, we are seen to be divided along these lines about Sharia being immutable, and how fiqh has become problematic in terms of how it's implemented, and how I think how women basically are prejudiced through today's application of it, and how we can move forward. And I like how you talk about formulation, because I think we seem to be missing aspects, or the usul seems to be missing. So also trying to go back to the purpose and the philosophy.
Okay, inshallah.
Maybe just the concept of a lot of times this thing about a weak hadith and a strong hadith is tossed around, and there's a tendency to, even if there's 20 of the hadiths which are maybe got one chain in the narration as weak, they are sort of discarded, or some people tend to discard them. Should we be discarding them, or should we be taking cognizance of them, and in what manner?
Good.
I would also like to more specifically assess where do the laws of inheritance fit in the entire discussion, and what sort of latitude we have in terms of interpreting.
So that may be one that's going narrow onto a specific issue. We'll try and see how to fit it in, but if you can make a note of it, I think the organizers are hoping that under discussions we'll probably be able to handle a few specific cases. So good. Yes, sir.
Maybe you can shed some light on the need for fiqh in the environment that we have of the hadith. So the need for fiqh, whilst there are those who propose that everything should come direct from the hadith.
Good.
So just I would like to know regarding ijtihad is in today's time. Is it possible to take place ijtihad?
Okay. Good. Yes, sir.
I'd like to know how we would reconcile modern liberal values and notions of justice, equity, equality with the Islamic worldview. As an example, the point that was made a moment ago, where there are now calls in either Tunisia or Morocco right now in popular press for the equalization of inheritance. Now that seems, for a modern liberal, perfectly acceptable and normal. But if you take the text to be immutable, then it puts us at tension with the trajectory of the modern world. And it's really playing up in different parts of the world, certainly in this country.
So related to the issue of fiqh and Sharia, what's immutable and what's not. Good.
And modern values, because maqasid can also be instrumentalized, ex post, justify what we consider to be right, which is purely rational.
This, just before we go on, this point underscores the importance of triangulation. You can make mistakes in usul, you can make mistakes in qawaid, you can make mistakes in maqasid, but ensuring you use them together ensures that maqasid doesn't just go off on its own without usul putting certain restrictions and guiding it. So inshallah, what you actually find is the more, and I'm still learning this, the more you understand usul, the more you understand qawaid, the more you understand maqasid, the easier it is to identify mistakes you have made in one of them. The other fields help become an alert system. That if you've made a mistake here, something else would let you know there must be something wrong with your position. So, inshallah, we'll look into that. Good. Yes.
A methodology for a human being to understand the divine revelation.
Good. Understanding the methodology that human beings can use to appreciate or understand divine revelation. Very good. And how, which actually takes us into this issue of why usul al-fiqh. Why do you think scholars came up with a field called usul al-fiqh? Tafsir we can understand, right? Why tafsir? The word of Allah. Okay, pretty straightforward. Why do we need a subject like ulumul hadith? Authenticity of the text. There has been fabrication and we'd like to do some sieving of information and to understand what exactly is the sunnah from the hadith perspective. Why do you think scholars came up with a field called usul al-fiqh? And probably even just before that, what is usul al-fiqh? Can anybody say it in any words? What is usul al-fiqh?
The tools for ijtihad.
The tools for ijtihad, very good.
The root.
The roots of fiqh. Good. These sound like big language, right? They're all correct.
It is that knowledge which enables us to find out the ruling of Sharia, the practical ruling of Sharia from its detailed sources.
Good. Good.
I like to think of it as Quranic principles
Okay.
that
Good.
guide legal.
Okay. Quranic principles that guide. It's correct. That could also apply to Qawaid, could also apply to Maqasid.
I think guidance that is not explicitly in the Quran.
Okay. Guidance that is not explicitly in the Quran.
The principles or the fundamentals of understanding the laws.
Good. Understanding the laws, the fundamental principles that guide that. And so what you find is, and I'll just say it in another way. Everything you've said is correct. So it's, during the time of the Prophet, if you had a question, you just ask the Prophet. Like, there's no need for ijtihad, whatever, just ask the Prophet. After the time of the Prophet ﷺ, those who understood the Prophet best were naturally his companions, and more especially those who were with him from the beginning. You know, from Makkah, they were there when the verses were revealed. They knew the context. When the Prophet said this, they knew the context. Of course, they didn't follow the Prophet like a shadow, but usually there was always one of them around him. Yeah. So if you put together the opinions of Sahaba, during the time of the Sahaba, if somebody had a question, the Prophet was not around, you would ask the Sahaba. Sahaba who knew the Quran, they knew the Sunnah, they knew what the Prophet would have done, would answer. And they brought all sorts of judgments. Things that on the surface seem to be contrary to the Quran or the Sunnah. A period of food shortage and some put famine. And for that reason, Umar suspends the cutting of the hands. The Prophet ﷺ made it very clear, do not take zakat on horses. During Umar's caliphate, he institutes zakat on horses. Abu Bakr was hesitant about, putting Quran as one book. Consultation, discussion, finally conclusion, yes, let's make sure it is done. And we will look at many other cases where the Sahaba, knowing a case of inheritance, the Himariya case of division of inheritance in a particular situation, and somebody is going to be disadvantaged by the ratios, for which Umar, and it is used as an example of maslahah, puts a portion for those people. Now, what you find is, after the time of the Sahaba, and you come to the Tabi'een and generations are moving, it becomes clear scholars still have to answer questions, but what the scholar wants to do, the Prophet said that ulama warathatul anbiya, that the ulama are the inheritors of the roles of prophets. They're not prophets, but they will inherit that role. They will continue to be giving judgments. But the sunnah, the better. If I put that as another way of saying it. The closer to the sunnah, the better. So the big question is, how do you represent the Prophet in his absence? How do you represent the Prophet in his absence? Can you eat kangaroo? What would the Prophet have said? And if you think, no, it will be halal, what is the method of arriving at halal? Not when you say, is it halal or not? What's going on in the head of a scholar? So for scholars like Shafi, this process of decision making that was going on in the head of Hanafi scholars and Maliki scholars, etc., it was too invisible. Let's write it down. Let's articulate it. Let's see it on paper. Let's then debate it. You know, for Hanafi scholars, yes, Quran and Sunnah, but mutawatir more, and hadith from Abu Huraira, nobody else, we'll put it aside. Anybody else backs it up. Is this arbitrary? And in classifying things, yes, there's haram, but there's also makruh tahrimi, and there's makruh. Well, why do we have, why not just makruh and haram? No, there should be another category. And fard and wajib should be separate, they shouldn't be made the same. Why not? Instead of we just see fatwas coming out of the head of a knowledgeable person, can we document the methodology, the equations, like what's going on in the head? So of course you would say from one perspective that fiqh existed, Muwatta and the books of Shaybani and the earlier scholars, these books were there before books on usul came. But there was an usul, there was a methodology of arriving at conclusions and arriving at fiqh. So even though historically you would say in form of books on fiqh came before usul, but every scholar will say, but you cannot have fiqh without an usul. It's just that they weren't written. So the writing of the methodology, the debate on methodology, was the major contribution of Imam Shafi. And so the subject of fiqh is really what is an objective methodology of representing the Prophet in his absence. Now, in handling this topic, I would want to simplify it, not simplify it for you, but hopefully simplify it as a way of sharing tools that make it easier for you to simplify it for others. And if you can come up with better analogies, so we'll be doing a lot of diagrams. Sorry, I haven't started drawing the tree. We'll be doing diagrams, we'll be doing metaphors, we'll be talking about fishing and Master Chef. We'll be doing a lot of things, hopefully with the hope that we will have easier, better tools for sharing some of these concepts with our students and with those we share this type of subject with. So if you look at Usulul Fiqh as the subject that studies the methodology of representing the Prophet in his absence, and as somebody said, you know, where the Quran and Sunnah is really clear on an issue, really clear, no difference of opinion, there's no need for any juristic or any super type of reasoning. There's no need to say, come on, put your thinking hat on. Why? It's so blatantly clear. What's the need for ijtihad on that? Does the hereafter exist? Of course, like it's repeated so many times in so many ways, it's not an issue. Is alcohol prohibited? Of course it's prohibited. How are you sure? We can see it from the Sunnah, we can see it from the Quran. Even if the meaning of this verse, fajtanibuhu, may not be clear, we can see how it was put in practice. There's no problem regarding some of these issues. It's a no-brainer. But where there's some ambiguity, where there's uncertainty regarding, yes, I understand this verse, but is it related to this particular context? Yes, I understand this position, but if the situation has changed, would this fatwa still apply? Usually in usul they have what they call the ahkam al-wadi'a. These are the factors surrounding a hukum. You know, when you say dhuhr is compulsory, not for everybody, not for women who are in their periods, not for children who are not mature, not for you before the time comes. Like when you say this is fard, without having to say it, there are certain conditions, circumstances, factors that are assumed when you say this is fard. It's assumed you're talking to a mature person. It's assumed they are not insane. It's assumed they are not traveling. It's assumed this and that. Otherwise, if any of those things are tweaked, then if he's traveling, yes, he could pray now, but he could also pray later. Or he could join, or he could this, or he could that. If you're sick, if you're this, you're that. So usulul fiqh is really the method of arriving at the hukum. Ultimately, what the scholar wants, what the scholar wants to do is know whether something is fard or wajib, or is it mustahab or mandub, or is it mubah or jaiz, or is it makruh, or is it haram. These two are the most important, because the thing about fard is it's an obligation, you must do it, and please, if need for translating anything, just let me know. But the thing with this is you must do it, but if you don't do it, there's a sin attached. It is punishable by Allah, unless Allah chooses to forgive. However, the default understanding is refusing to do this, there's a sin for omission is one M, right?
Yes.
Don't tell my mom. Okay, there's a sin for omitting. And with here, there's a sin for committing. Forgive my writing also. So, you're sure it's not double N?
It is double. It is double.
I'll tell them about that. Still looks funny. Anyway, so when you say there's a sin, you mean Allah will punish. You have to be careful you don't lie. You know, this is really serious. That Allah considers it like if you're going to, nobody else can make something a sin other than the Creator, other than the lawgiver. And so if you're going to say there's a sin, you need some level of evidence, not just I don't like it. It looks disgusting. Your tastes. It has to be something you can take back that either Allah said it clearly in the Quran or it's in the Sunnah brought by the Prophet ﷺ. And so these two have a similar criteria. But these five are the major values for classifying anything. You know, any action, how desirable or undesirable is it? You can classify that spectrum into five. How many types of human beings are there? If you're to classify human beings, how many types of human beings?
Hopefully not.
3 types? 4? 1 type? Same thing. When you come to classify actions, how many categories based on levels of desirability or undesirability? And for some, 5 would do. But if you classify humanity into 2, are you sure we've not got a big group in between the two? Yeah. Normally, if you classify things just into two, you've got a lot of big in-betweens. If you classify them into three, maybe better. If you classify human beings into 100, then definitely group number 1 is very different from group number 100. There may not be significant difference between 1 and 2, but there is a clear difference between 1 and 10. Now, for Hanafi scholars, classifying things into 5 is good but not good enough. To the Hanafis, there are things in between fard and mustahab that are significant enough to have another category. So for them, there's a category here they call wajib. And there's something between makruh and haram that is not strong enough to put under haram. It's not something you don't take that seriously as to leave it under makruh. So they have what? Makruh tahrimi. And this they will call tanzihi. So you've got this. So some have 7, others have 5. This is human ways of representing the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet didn't give everything a name. So witr prayer, is it mustahab? Well, this terminology was not given by the Prophet ﷺ. But from all the evidence, a scholar says, this is mustahab. Another one says, no, I think it is more important than just a mustahab. I think witr should be wajib, not fard. This is where language sometimes becomes a problem, because wajib means compulsory, fard means compulsory. So you could say Hanafis consider there are 6 compulsory prayers in a day. Witr making it 6. If, however, you say how many prayers are fard, then everybody, including the Hanafis, says there are 5. We'll look at the differences between these, because at the end of usul is everything that goes the Quran plus Sunnah plus Ijma plus Qiyas minus Amal plus Istihsan minus Istishab plus Maslaha minus this plus this. All this plus minus is, some scholars recognize it, some scholars don't recognize it. Some say yes to this, some say no. Yes to this, no. Yes to this type, no to that type, and so that's complication. But at the end of all the equation, the scholar really wants to know which of these ones to conclude for an action. So usul is really what's happening here, and at the end of the day, all the qawaid and everything you're trying to do, you want to conclude. So the final answer, is it fard or mustahab, mubah, makruh? What exactly is it? Ijtihad is the juristic reasoning, or just say good reasoning. Okay, simple word for it. Good reasoning that is respectful of the Quran and the Sunnah. It is what happens when the Quran and the Sunnah alone don't clearly answer a question. So if Quran and Sunnah have already answered it, there's no need for ijtihad, there's no need for usul. There's no need for putting a thinking hat on. If the Quran and Sunnah are already completely clear on an issue. It is where there's ambiguity. Either, what exactly does this mean? Or, I understand what it means, but does it really apply to this context, or have some of those factors changed? Or there is complete silence in the text. The text says nothing about it. You may try to do qiyas, you may try to, but you are trying. What does the Quran or Sunnah say about blood transfusion? organ donation? Anything?
Smoking.
Immunization.
Or immunization?
Babies.
Okay. What does the Quran or Sunnah say about these things? They weren't done. You can try and say, should we say that organ transplant is similar to eating an organ? Consumption. Okay. Hurimat alaykum dam. Blood is prohibited. Okay. To consume. That's what the verse is clear about. Does it also mean that blood transfusion is prohibited? Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Would cupping have some relation to?
Okay. So that's another way of looking. Is it okay to remove blood from yourself? Okay. Is it okay to take blood out of you and give it to somebody else? Would we use a method of reasoning? Photography. What does the Quran or Sunnah say about photographs? Nothing. Nothing. You wouldn't say Allah is a photographer when you say he is Musawwir, right? So what do scholars do? They would look at portrait drawings that were done and say, that is similar to a photograph. Allah didn't say it's similar. You're the one saying it's similar. Another scholar says, no. At the time of the Prophet, people looked inside a mirror. They had mirrors. And the image in a mirror is similar to the image in a photograph. And if it's okay to look into a mirror, it should be okay to look at a photograph. It's all, which kind of reasoning are you doing? So where the Quran and Sunnah are silent on an issue, then ijtihad picks up. And we will look at the various tools of ijtihad, like qiyas and many of these others. So, ijtihad is that juristic reasoning. Usulul fiqh is the field that studies the methodology to give guidance to ijtihad. So if ijtihad is the what you do, the reasoning, Usulul fiqh studies the how and why. Yeah. So it's not just I'm reasoning, no rules guiding my reasoning. There's the Quran making it clear that its guidance is liqawmi yatafakkarun, li'ulul albab, liqawmi yaqilun, for people who would reflect, reason. But how do we guide our reasoning? Anybody with a sense of reasoning knows I'm limited in my reasoning. Like, you're not God, you're not unlimited. Everybody knows it's limited. How do we limit it in a respectful way so that we are not undermining a gift from Allah? Abu Hamid al-Ghazali said, the relationship between reasoning and revelation is similar to the relationship between the eyes and light. To say you are going to use your reasoning, no revelation, is like moving around with your eyes open in the dark. You will find the furniture with your shin, right? To say you are going to use revelation without reasoning is like moving around in broad daylight with your eyes shut. You still find the furniture or car with your knee. Both reason and revelation are gifts to guide us. How do we make sure we are able to use them together? When does reasoning decide? Because if you look at it in one way, whatever conclusion you have arrived at from the text, it's still your reasoning. Okay? When you say this means this, yes, according to you. When is reasoning superior to another reasoning? What's the criteria? When do we say let's go with the letter of the law? When do you go with the spirit of the law? And here we will find the role of triangulation. So, usul, the roots, the protocols, the consistent methodology of, or which guides and regulates ijtihad, the rulings we want from it. We've looked briefly at the evolution from the time of the Prophet, where you just ask the Prophet, Sahaba, you consult with each other, and the need later on to start agreeing on methodology, and the phase of usul in particular. A particular scholar, and we'll come back to this in more detail later, like Abu Hanifa, has a method. Shafi has a method. Malik has a method. And they differed on some issues. After they look at each other's methods, and their students and subsequent scholars endorse that method, that school of scholars that have agreed this is the best method of representing the Prophet in his absence, that group is called a madhab. A madhab is a school of scholars that have agreed on a particular methodology. Within the school you can have differences, but it's not sufficiently different enough to justify starting another school. We will look into what exactly do the scholars consider tools for ijtihad. So as we said, by way of revision, if you've got a tree with fruit, fruit should be red, right, or yellow? Down here at the roots of the tree, and I'll crank this soon, down here scholars considered Quran and Sunnah as the most important source of legislation. But if Quran and Sunnah are silent, then what? What else will be the source? What else is validated by the Quran and the Sunnah, and especially if we saw it in the practice of Sahaba? So here, it's to look at Sahaba as mujtahid imams and ask yourself, how did they reason? When Quran and Sunnah were ambiguous or silent, how do we document the methodology that the Sahaba used in arriving at whether something was fard or haram or whatever category? And what are those sources of law? What are those tools? Everybody agreed that Quran and Sunnah were primary sources, fundamental sources, the number one and number two. Everybody agreed on that. Where they started to have differences came when they considered, all right, what else? What else? Let's take the case of a family. You all grew up with your dad. Of course, there's the firstborn, and the dad was probably 25 years old when he was born, and he worked in the family business, on the farm, here and there. The second born was born about 3 years later, and they had about 4 or 5 children. The father dies. The family has a major decision making to make regarding the farm. They all want to make a decision that if the father was around, he would have endorsed. Are we together? How would they come about with, like what tools would, like if the father was around, it would have been straightforward. In the absence of the father, and they want to decide what would the father have done if he was in this situation, what would you recommend?
Ask those closest to him.
Sorry?
Consult with those who are closest to him.
Good. Because those who are closest to him would know, firstly, was there a will? If there was a will where the father says, when I'm dead, you should do this, if there, then there's no brainer. And we don't need to crack our heads about it. Mom, has father said anything about this? No. Well, there was a similar case, but it's not exactly this one. So one thing is, if there was a will, if there's anything written down, no problem. We just quote the father. He said this, and that's his will. If, however, there was no will, nothing verbal, what type of tools would you suggest we use as a family? Or maybe it's even friends. What type of tools would you suggest we consider? Yes, sir.
What you just mentioned, similar cases, very close.
So, one, is there something similar? Yes, not exactly like this, but let's say the case is an uncle, long lost uncle, comes and he's made about 10 million in his business, etc. And he wants to recommend, you know what, yeah, my brother, your father, passed away, and I would like to contribute something to the family. But not in cash, in kind. I would like to extend and improve the size of the house. But it's the kind of thing I would do because I think your dad would have loved, he would have liked that done. Has dad faced any similar proposals before? The issue of extending or expanding the house, has that ever come up before? Well, yes, there was once when his friend who was a contractor offered to do this, and he said, no, I'd rather the money actually go back into that other charity or that other thing. Like if there was a case that was similar before, you can use that to say, well, that gives us an idea of the hikmah, the wisdom. If we know the wisdom behind that decision of our dad, then we could tell you what he would do in this situation. The wisdom or the reason our dad made that decision is called the illah, or the hikmah. Behind that decision, then we will do qiyas. We use that case and say that is similar to this new case, and the judgment of that we will pass on to the new case. So that's one way of looking at things. And that one they would call qiyas. What other way?
His personal philosophy. I mean, we know what your parent is like, what their feelings are, what they would do if they had extra money, so yeah.
So you don't have a specific quote, you don't have a specific case, but you know your dad well enough to say this is the sort of thing he would have done with that money. Why? Because of the sort of thing he does with extra money. Okay? So you look now at the values that your dad stands with. There are so many cases that make you say, I think he would have done this. Now, that concern for what you would call, not things that our dad said, but there's a whole spirit behind his decision making, is what some call istihsan. Concern for equity, okay. Concern for values. especially values of fairness, of justice. And some would actually consider that as more important than your reasoning by analogy. Some would say if it's something that affects the public, and we know our dad was always interested in the common good, then similar to istihsan would be what? Maslaha. Very good. Maslaha. Okay. Public interest. What is in the interest of the common good? If this decision was going to be made by somebody outside the family, he may say, any qiyas we can do on this? And he said, no. But there's one family member, probably the eldest son, or somebody who we know knows the dad very well, and he has a very strong opinion on something. He feels that let's put the money towards this. He didn't say the dad said so, but he knows the dad. Okay? So, for anybody who is an outsider, if you hear that son or that daughter say, this is what we should do with the money, you can't say, I know better than you how to represent your dad. What you do is there any agreement or disagreement among the siblings on this issue? And everybody seems to be silent about it. So there's an opinion of a family member that nobody else argues about. That is equivalent to what they call ra'i of a sahaba. Okay? The opinion of a sahaba. A sahaba said something, no other sahaba conflicts or contradicts that sahaba. Sometimes, the whole family seems to have a consensus on what to do. If the money should go to an orphanage. Which orphanage? They all said, that particular one, not the others. You all talk with so much certainty. Did your dad say so? No, but we know our dad. So it's not, there's a will your dad left behind. There's not, he said. If not, we would go by what he said. If there was a will, we'll go by what the will says. But if no will, yeah. But you all seem to have concluded, yeah. Whether some of you concluded it by qiyas or maslaha or istihsan, there's a consensus, yeah. Nobody disagrees among you? No. How could you argue with that family? You know, consensus, yeah. No, but except me. No, everybody agrees. That is called ijma. A consensus where everybody agrees. So where the Quran is silent, the Sunnah is silent, but you find all Sahaba agree on something, that is called ijma. All scholars agree, and we'll look at the different definitions of ijma. Now let's assume that just before your dad passed away, actually let's go back to the real case, the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet, for the latter part of his life, lived in Medina. For about 10 years. He passed away. During his lifetime, if there was any sunnah that was supposed to be implemented, he would share it with the community. If there was any understanding of the verse of the Quran that was to be understood, he would share that with the community. If there was anything that was part of the sunnah that some Sahaba knew, another one didn't know, then probably during the lifetime of Abu Bakr, a case would have come up and people would have known about it. With all the lessons and ta'aleems going on in Medina, in the mosque, somebody would have said something about it. And if nothing was said, and he was a caliph for just over 2 years, Abu Bakr, you now had Umar. Umar was a caliph for how long?
2 years.
About 10 years. if there was any sunnah that was supposed to be practiced, within 10 years, somebody would have raised it and we would have seen it practiced. And when Umar passed away, the next caliph was Uthman. Uthman was a caliph for how long? About 12 years. 12 years. So if there was any sunnah that was to be put in place, if the Prophet couldn't have done it, Abu Bakr would have done it. He didn't have the time, Umar would have. He didn't have, Uthman would have. And these others were still alive. Okay, most of the Sahaba were still around. So somebody would have been there to make sure everybody knew about it. By the time of Ali, the caliphate had changed. However, if there was any society that's supposed to be saturated by the Sunnah, it would have been this city called Medina. If bid'ah was to come, it would come from somewhere else, not from here. If ignorance was going to be a problem of the Ummah, it wasn't going to be in this society. If hadith was going to move from somewhere to somewhere else, it was going to move from Medina elsewhere, not the other way around. You can't come and say, oh, I've got one hadith that you people in Medina don't know. Very difficult. And so, for Imam Malik, whose teachers were students of the Sahaba, so just to get what generation we're talking about, his teachers were students of the Sahaba. So he had Zuhri, for example, as a teacher. He met Nafi, who was a student and freed slave of Ibn Umar, who was a Sahaba. So you had, this was not like 100, 200, like far away. His teachers were students of the Sahaba. So for Imam Malik, to understand the Sunnah, you want to learn how to do adhan? Imam Malik didn't consider hadith important for that. Why? Adhan has been recited in this city every day, 5 times, during the life of the Prophet, and has continued. And if thousands of people passed down how to call adhan, that adhan, that is the product of thousands of people passing it to another generation, is more reliable than some hadith that somebody says, that somebody said, and we don't have any corroboration with the practice in the city of Medina. So for Malik, another source of understanding the Sunnah was what they call the amal. The amal of the Ahl al-Madinah, the practice of the people of Medina. And of course, so for him, this was so important that if you came up with a hadith, first question Malik wants is it supported by the amal? If you say no, he says, then I don't know the context in this hadith, but we're not going to follow this hadith and start a new practice that the Sahaba and Medina seem to know nothing about. So for Malik, amal was similar to a mutawatir hadith. Of course, Malikis distinguish different grades of amal. Why? How are you sure this amal was a practice from the time of the Prophet and Sahaba and not just some governor making a new policy? So they had al-amal indana and al-amal mujtama indana. So they had their own reclassification of amal based on whether this was just something that was a customary practice in Medina or whether it was something that the scholars had agreed this came as part of Sunnah. So we have ijma and qiyas. We have istihsan, maslaha. Then you had certain things that Sahaba noticed. They noticed that the Prophet didn't come and just uproot everything in Jahiliyyah. Trade was going on. Riba was going on. Riba was made haram, trade was allowed. Various financial instruments, ijara, this hiring of that was going on. Musharaka, partnerships, mudaraba, where you've got a silent partner and an active partner. You've got different types of trade agreements going on. You've got different types of dressing. going on. Different customary practices of warfare. You know, when you're going to start battle, you send your top 3 champions, we send our own top. This is a Jahiliyyah practice. The Prophet had no problem with it. The Prophet seemed to have no problem with customary practices that weren't harmful, they weren't oppressive, they weren't a problem. Actually, he practiced them, and they were actually regarded now as Sunnah. We'll come to the classifications of Sunnah later. So a lot of things that fall under what the Prophet said or did were things he said or did, or others said or did but he approved of or he was silent about, because they were part of customary practice. So because customary practice was accepted, some scholars took that, therefore, when he went to Medina, and Medina people were more, they loved entertainment better, you know, more. So, they like music and playing whatever before, well, yeah, give it to them, you know, they like it. It's their urf, it's their custom. In other words, he didn't come and say, no to Medinan culture, we're going to stick with Meccan culture. There were certain things he personally didn't like, but you know what, if you're okay with it, go ahead and eat this particular type of lizard. He's Meccan town guy, you know. You survivors and people who, you know, used to Khalid, you know, used to staying on the outdoors and all of that type of thing, they have no problem with eating. Prophet, you want to eat? No. Can we eat it? Go ahead. Is it, you know, is it haram? No, I just personally don't like that type of thing. But you want to eat it, it's not haram by default. It's actually halal by default, except if there's evidence that it is haram. So every type of food was halal by default, except if the Quran or the Prophet made it haram. Prophet would be angry with people who would make things haram, no basis. Scholars would look at the Quran, Adam and Eve, you can eat anything in the garden except. Like the rule was permissibility except if there's a prohibition. You know, there seemed to be just this understanding that people are all innocent until proven guilty. No proof, yeah, let him go free. Not you are guilty until proven innocent. Yeah. You know, he tells me this guy stole my whatever. Well, prove it is yours to start with. Prove he stole it. Not you, prove you didn't steal. You know. So by looking at those basic assumptions and procedures that everything seems to be permissible except if it is prohibited. Sorry, we've already written both, right?
No.
So you got custom
Can I
there.
just ask something?
Please.
The adat of the people, the sunnah of the people was allowed for a certain time, but afterwards reforms were made in that.
Reforms were made if there was a need for reform. If there was a need for reform, it was allowed. And so as the Ummah continued to progress, we found different, even mosque architecture started to change. We got a symbol of a crescent moon and star, which was a Turkish Jahiliyyah, Turkish thing, but they used it as the symbol and it was part of Muamalat, it was part of Urf, and they had no problem with it, and scholars had no problem with it. And architecture of domes, and all sorts of things that Islam went, met people, new types of food, new administrative structures, new taxation systems that were better than what they had during the Jahiliyyah period. It was urf, was it good, did it contradict anything? If not, they had no problem in adopting and being creative, even with their own. And so that was to do with urf. And actually scholars reached a conclusion, al-ada muhakkam, that people's custom has the weight of law. So we actually go with your urf. And if you come to a judge with a case, and there's a debate between somebody and his wife, they come to court and say they're having a divorce, all right, but that's not the issue. And what's the issue? There are two things. There's a huge diamond ring. The husband is saying, this is mine. My mother gave it to me. Any evidence? No. The wife is saying, no, the ring is mine. My mother gave it to me. Okay, any evidence? No. The only person who was there was my dad, but he's dead. But I've always kept it in the house. No, I have always kept it in the house. No Quran, no Sunnah, nothing to help the judge. The judge goes with urf. Customarily, who do such diamond rings belong to? More to men or more to women? If it's more to women, he will judge according to urf. That law that this type of ring goes to women is not from the Quran or the Sunnah. It's in that custom. In another custom, a different type of ring would be a man's ring. A different type of watch would be a man's watch. There's the kind of thing that in this culture, no. Men are the ones who own samurai swords or this particular, so if it's a weapon in a particular culture, that's, so if you say, but this was a sword that belonged to Shaka Zulu himself, you know, whatever, how much would it cost on the market? Or I inherited, who does it belong to? Urf would be a basis. In other words, this was viewed as a source of Sharia rulings in the absence of others. But also, some of the things we've touched on. This default assumption, the mindset that everything is permissible except what is prohibited. The things are considered pure. You can do tayammum here, there, unless there's evidence that it is najas. So purity is assumed as the default state of everything. That people are innocent until proven guilty. That type of thinking is called what? Istishab. The presumption of the status quo. The presumption of continuity. You know, that everything is halal except what is haram, that things are pure until whatever, that things are innocent until proven guilty, that humans are free unless there's evidence that they are not free. That people are free from any responsibility unless you can prove I have a responsibility. And if we know a responsibility has been given to you, that you are responsible unless we have evidence that you are no more responsible. You have a child, you are responsible. Unless you can tell us why this son or daughter of yours is roaming around, got into an accident, why should we not blame you? The default ruling is you. Yeah. You would have to prove, yeah, but her cousin said she would take them here. You'd have to prove that. So that type of thinking, where there are certain assumptions you operate with, that is called istishab. Some would say, have we missed anything? Okay. So others. Another tool that some use is preclusion. You know, they look at alcohol being prohibited. And then they see a whole lot of other things were prohibited, but they seem to all be prohibited because they facilitate or lead to alcohol consumption. Don't sit at a table where alcohol is being served. Of course, some scholars say that is if the people drinking alcohol are Muslims, not if they're not Muslims. The non-Muslims drinking alcohol or eating pork, it's permissible in the view of some scholars. Others, that's another issue. So you have a case where you don't carry alcohol, you don't transport it, you don't sit at a table where you're like, I'm not drinking, yes, but anything that would create an atmosphere of it's okay, that could facilitate drinking, don't do it. Zina haram, that's an end in itself. But any means towards zina is also blocked. Murder is haram. Manslaughter is haram. But then you are told, don't even point a weapon at somebody. What's wrong in pointing a weapon? I'm not shooting. Yes, But don't do anything that may lead to, he raises his weapon. What if somebody accidentally pulls the trigger? What if? So the scholars, looking at things that are haram, they kind of realize there are a lot of things that are also made haram that lead to one haram. That blocking of the means to a haram, the moment you've identified this haram, this thing, it could lead to good, it could lead to bad, but there's a greater chance it could lead to bad. Is it significant? Is it really highly probable? Not anything you block. Okay, a woman was raped on her way to the mosque. Women, no more going to the mosque. A man was robbed on his way to the mosque. No more going to the mosque. You know, you die on an accident on your way to work. No more going to work. It's not, so it's not like that. It's that there's a high likelihood, nearly certain, that if you do this, it will result in that. Yeah. And there's no other beneficial thing. There are contexts in which something that is normally unacceptable, exposing her aura, normally, no. To a doctor, for a different purpose, yes. And we'll come back to how these rulings operate. So this idea of blocking means to haram, that the moment something is harmful and it is clear something will lead there, and the scholar will say this is haram. This you're digging of a hole on a main road at night, no men at work, no nothing, whatever, a scholar will say this is haram. Why? It will lead to a harm. That type of thinking, which is a consequential thinking, you're thinking of what will this lead to? And it's going to lead to the things we all agree are haram, like killing or injuring people or hurting, etc., etc. That type of thinking is saddu dhariya. So we'll just put sandi. Okay? Saddu dhariya is blocking of means to haram. Other tools include sharu man qablana, which is looking at the Sharia of Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book. And what some scholars do, while they consider it the weakest source of judgment, the fact that Ahl al-Kitab were given guidance, some look at it that if we don't have anything in the Quran or Sunnah or Ijma or Qiyas or Istihsan, Istishab, we don't have any of that, we can consider some of their rules. Sorry?
Give us an example.
Should we have Saturday and Sunday as a weekend? Okay. Quran, there's no weekend per se. You know, even after Jummah prayer, fantashuru fil ard. Prophet even discouraged fasting and discouraged trying to make Friday a special day. So even if we were told have a weekend, we'll probably try and avoid Friday. But if we want a Friday, there's nothing wrong in having a Friday. It's mu'amalat, it's not ibadah, it's not actual worship. Any problem in having Saturday and Sunday? Yeah. Ijma? No ijma on not having it. Because it's mu'amalat, everything is halal except what is haram. So is it haram? No. From ijma? No. From qiyas? And you go on and on and on and on. And some would say, listen, it is the urf of the majority, and we have no problem with urf. Others say it is shar'u man qablana, not urf. Okay, this is where they sometimes differ in their terminology. Others will say, well, since it is Sabbath, is a Saturday for the Jews, and for the Christians, what they took as the Sabbath was the Sunday. If they're okay with it, we're okay with it too. So it's not viewed as a strong source of legislation. Others don't recognize it, but they recognize if it came as urf. If it came as, it's in the public interest. If half of the community is having a holiday for religious reasons, the rest of us can take the day off for our own other benefit. So they would actually approach the same thing, but use maslahah. So as we will see later, these tools, yes, they look separate, but some would not recognize a particular tool because they feel one tool has already done that job. We don't need another tool. And so sometimes the debates in usul are really semantics. Some. For the sharu man qablana, some use examples of the punishment for qisas, murder. There's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth thing, as yes, it is in the Torah and we accept it. However, because it is in the Quran, many scholars say we're not accepting it because it was in theirs, we're accepting it because it's from the Quran. Just the fact that it was repeated is like saying there's one God. Yeah, there's one God in our scripture, there's one God in their scripture. We're not saying there's one God because they said there's one God. We are saying it independent of theirs. And so others don't take sharu man qablana, others say you can take it, but they still consider it a weak source. So to conclude on these roots, where you don't have Quran, Sunnah, what else do you take? Scholars have come up with all sorts of things to guide them. Okay. So what we said in the last one, this issue of istishab, just by looking at how judgments were made, by looking at what things were made haram, when a new issue comes, they look for what's an appropriate tool to use in a particular context. What we will do when we come back from break, inshallah, is to look at how the madhabs consolidated certain tools. Yeah. So we'll look at the equations of the various schools and how they used those equations, what they had in common, where they differed, because then we will start to understand one of the questions that was raised, why the difference of opinion between madhabs, and how, if you have a different equation, you would most likely have a different answer. Inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Before I forget, please, as we proceed, I should have said this from the beginning, if you have any comment, any question, any footnote, any heading, any attachment, just bring it in as we move, inshallah. Somebody put his hand up.
I just want to find out, you're talking about certain things which were acceptable, because of the part of the custom of the people that own. There are things, like you see the suckling and all that, which is in the Quran, and very much acceptable, that. But there's always this problem that when you begin to, the people make mention of the people who are giving the scripture, and then you find people just, they just lose it. So it comes to that now. It becomes a very big problem on how do you really look at that.
No, I think as an ummah we have developed certain allergies, certain things we don't like to talk about. Custom. We for example, we'll talk about our customary practices and our food as okay. But Western custom, Western culture is treated as if it's a default haram. Okay? Like it's just as if it's in our heads that once it's Western, it is haram by default. Whereas all urf, all ada, the assumption is everything is permissible. Haram is not tied to geography. Haram is tied to, does the Quran or Sunnah or any of these make it haram or makruh or any of these categories. So I think, yes, we can sometimes be very overreactive, but part of the purpose of usul is, like, I'm Nigerian, and I think Nigerian. I don't think South African. When you start talking about race issues, I honestly only have an academic understanding of what you're talking about. I don't like answering any question that I don't even know what they're talking about. There's how my upbringing has affected the way I see things, the way I judge things, and what I could eat or not eat, and yuck to this, and that's just me. But if you ask me, what does Islam say, I have to try and put that aside and honestly ask, what exactly does the Quran say about this type of clothing? Somebody puts some trousers halfway down, okay? I can't see the person's backside. I see some other kind of boxers or whatever. So, do I have actually anything from the Quran against it? Anything from the Sunnah against this? Or is it just this is a new urf, a new countercultural trend moving, as nearly every culture was at one time a counter to another? Or is it one that goes contrary to the mother? I would have to find a way of separating my own yuck factor and cognitive cultural influence. Why? Because I'm to speak on behalf of Allah and the Prophet. And so it's one where I would probably like, and this is why need for a lot of humility when you come to ijtihad and respect diversity, but this is not where you're going to, well, God's position according to Sharia, Islamic teachings on this is, like, you can't get that authoritarian. So we will see inshallah how sometimes this triangulation using qawaid, maqasid and the various tools in usul, scholars try to reduce the subjectivity, and it's not perfect, it's a whole human system, but it's guided by the way the Sahaba did things and put things in place, and it at least reduces error. So it's not foolproof, and you would find on some areas scholars differing, but because it's not like mathematics, you can find on one spectrum of something, say this is maths and this is art or food, or this is really tied to taste, and it's so subjective.
Condition.
Okay, yeah, arguing doesn't make me agree that this food is nicer than the other. We can sit and crack our heads on it, etc. Okay, but this is very, very subjective. Here, it's worth arguing. Yeah, and more information can get greater consensus on a mathematical issue. We don't agree on that, then let's look at the equation. Let's look at how it is derived. Spending time here is useful. What usul al-fiqh tries to do is to try and move closer to here. This is not completely subjective. You can find experts of art critics, experts who have really good tastes, and tell you this is nice. I don't know what's nice about it. The problem is your tongue. You're the problem. Experts will still say this is the best food. They have about 50-something, I was reading somewhere, names for tastes. 50-something. Like, I know sweet and very sweet and sour and salty and spicy and whatever, but when somebody starts telling you for drinks, these people who are wine tasters, etc., they've got a whole ranking of tastes that many of us like. I don't know what you're talking about. But the point being, you can still have experts who are able to have an ijma, so to speak, a consensus. And, their opinions matter. So it's not completely subjective. But what scholars are trying to do is really bring it to something. Let's have rules that make it easier for scholars to reach a consensus on issues. So yes, custom is an issue, but our main focus here is on how scholars approach things, not how just anybody.